Welcome back, everybody, to another transcontinental party pace podcast. I'm joined once again with my co-host Nolan, all the way from the Pacific Coast, aka the Bike Sauce. How's it going, Nolan?
Good. Yes, it's been a little bit, couple weeks, I think. So glad to be back.
Yeah. So today we're going to tackle your gravel FAQs, frequently asked questions, or frequently annoying questions, depending on which end you are at. But before we answer your FAQs, do leave them in the chat stream. We have some that we handpicked from our individual communities, but if you've got some that you want answered in the stream, put them in the chat. Let's do a little catch up. So you had a meetup recently. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the Richie meetup was an idea that started with some local riders who had the same Outback that I was building up. So we kind of checked in on each other and checking out each other's builds, and started with this idea that, hey, we should do a ride together. And I don't know, I mentioned it to Fergus that we were going to put something together. He got all excited, and turned into a pretty nice event. So we held it at Maverick Cycles here in Whittier, California. Relatively new shop, but getting pretty popular with the community. And then one of my buddies, Andrew, he had a pop-up which was really popular. He, prepared the menu, set up the pop-up, and the food was a hit as well. So
Cool.
I think we had probably 40 to 50 riders in the group.
Oh, dang.
So,
that's a good turnout.
good turnout. Tough to manage, especially for the first time that I've led a group ride. Everybody made it back. Couple falls, I think, but no one left behind, and that was the goal of the ride. Is zero drop. Try and keep it party pace, or tempo tranquilo.
Yeah. What was the ratio of new to old Richies? Was it mostly new stuff?
Great question. So the whole point was to showcase, the community's Richie bikes, and there were a large proportion of first generation Outbacks, first generation Ascents. We saw one of the first Ascents out there. I think there were a couple of the mountain bike, older P29ers, I think. So really cool to just kind of see, what people have built up over the past really several decades, because some of those bikes go back to 90s, maybe 90s or late 90s, early 2000s anyway. So really fun. Yeah. Fun event, very successful, at least for our first event of that sort.
Cool. Do you think you'll do it again?
Yeah, everyone who participated is, they're asking when's the next one. So, even if we start with semi-annually or something, I think that would be a good start. Yeah. So very fun. You guys took a much more exciting trip recently, I think. Yeah.
It was still pretty mellow, but there were castles involved.
Was this a bike tour or a bike packing trip?
It was overnight. So, one of the cool things, about living in this region is that there are just so many small, interesting towns with medieval city centers that we decided to just, on the lark, go out and stay at one.
Okay.
I used it as an excuse to test out the Pelago Aristo, which is kind of a step-through mixed style bike, but they kind of frame it as their adventure light forest path bike packing bike, outfitted with a basket. And yeah, it was a good excuse to take it out.
Nice. So that was a 1-night trip. Is it?
Yeah, we took. Spain has a series of these off-road routes, generally off-road, called Via Verdes. Some of them are rail trails, some of them are decommissioned roads, small portions on-road. And we took that one from Girona to the town of Olot, and then took some back roads back into Girona. So it was just a shakedown ride for the spring, for future tours, and an excuse to go basket packing.
Nice. Is it those roads, are they all close to traffic? Did you see no cars? Oh, okay.
There were a few cars, the Via Verdes, portions of it are close to traffic. On the route back, we wanted to ride something different, so we took some smaller highways, but there was generally like pretty low traffic, especially this time of year. Like tourism or the tourist traffic hasn't really picked up yet. So
Oh, okay. That's got to be really nice. Like roads with little traffic. That's kind of
yeah,
unheard of around here.
I know. It's so charming. But one of the things I did bring was we've gone into ping pong, and for
Yeah.
whatever reason, there's a lot of like public ping pong tables at the parks. So
Uh-huh.
we'd stop and just slap the ball around. Good excuse to stretch the legs.
That's cool. Yeah, there's a couple of those around here that I've seen. It's always a surprise when we find one. It's like, oh, this is
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Cool. Very nice.
All
Uh,
right. So should we talk about any of the new drops? Maybe just for a hot second.
yeah, sure. Yeah. Which ones do you have in mind?
So there's the new Campy 13-speed gravel, slightly more consumer friendly.
It's not that much
Group
cheaper, as far as I
yeah,
understand. Right? Yeah.
yeah.
So what are the changes? They went basically just bigger cassette. Is that the deal?
Bigger cassette. One of the big complaints was that the range wasn't very, big for actual like bike packing or off-road stuff.
Yeah.
I think they also changed the material of the cranks, so they're aluminum and not carbons that
Right.
help lower the price. But still 13 speed, marginally less expensive,
Mhm.
and that's about it.
The big ring, the big cog was previously 42, was it?
Something like
And
that.
so did it go? I think it went up to 46 or 48, right?
Yeah.
That's
Um,
that's reasonable, depending on the chain ring, I guess, right?
yeah, they're catching up to 2016. Good job, Campy. It does beg the larger question, like it's the first year that they've not been represented in the tour, and there's
Yeah.
a question of whether they're still relevant, and they seem to have lost so much market share to the two S's.
Yeah. Well, I think
I mean,
this was part of their answer to that, I think, right?
yeah. I mean, I feel like for the last decade or so, they've really pigeonholed themselves into like the super pointy end of the performance. So
Mhm.
there's no like on ramp for new cyclists. So if you didn't grow up with like the campy lore, it's just that weird, very expensive Italian group set,
Yeah. Right, right, right. Yeah, well, and the fact that it's not represented in the tour, that's probably a bigger deal than it sounds, especially, like, given their customer base.
Yeah,
I don't know, it'll be tough to see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they respond. Like, if
yeah,
this is their only answer to bringing things a little bit more affordable and wider range, and I'm not
yeah,
sure if it's gonna
yeah.
not sure if it's gonna do it.
It'll be like just the ultra boutique brand, like the Leica of bike components.
Right. Right, right, right.
Other kind of significant drop I thought was the whole Silka waxing pot slash strip chip,
Yes.
which is kind of pretty interesting. It looked very similar to the system that CycloWax put out that I got to test on the channel.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, not tried the Silka one. I do want to do like a side by side to see how different the systems are.
Yeah. The strip chip is really interesting, like, from a chemical standpoint, right? Because you can just well, you can't throw I my understanding is you can't throw, like, a used chain, like a pre-greased or I mean, a chain that you've been riding with some aftermarket lubes on it. But
Yeah.
if you've got a factory chain, which has all the factory grease on it, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you just dump the whole thing in with the strip chip, it'll clean it and wax it at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the video I watched, he said that they took brand new factory chains and kind of found the similar ingredients that they were using in the factory grease and built the strip chip to take that away, but can't account for like the random things that other like aftermarket consumer lubes put in.
Right, right.
So looks
Which
interesting.
which sounds cool, like, I do understand, like, you also have to kinda it's not totally automatic, it's not a one-step process because 'cause you've gotta manage the ratio of strip chip to wax in your bath, I suppose.
Right.
So I'm not sure how that works, like, how do you know when to drop in a new chip and
Hmm.
so forth. But it does sound pretty straightforward. Other than that.
Yeah, it also sounds as if it's a little bit more hands-on in terms of the agitation. Like you really have to shake it up, as opposed to the chain stripper, which is, you kind of agitate vigorously and then let it sit.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, you got to get one and try it, or maybe I should.
yeah, you'll probably get it first. Like I don't know if I'm assuming they have some in Europe, but we'll see. Okay, so let's get on to your Gravel FAQs. Should we pull one from the chat first, or one of the pre-selected questions?
Yeah, sure. Entry. We can browse the chat. I do see.
Someone here?
You go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say I see a lot of frame material.
Yeah, let's talk frame material in terms of gravel bikes. This is a tricky one: steel or tie. Have you ridden a tie frame?
Yeah, I've ridden all three of the metals.
Yeah,
I mean, there's more than three. But...
Have you ridden a brass frame? It's the most supple material of all.
Yeah, it was bronze. Yeah,
yeah.
Steel versus tie. Yeah, this is a very loaded, like the most concise, most loaded question, I think. I've ridden the tie. I've ridden a tie frame, which was the Black Heart all road titanium. I really like that bike. It people claim that there's some magic in the titanium material. I felt comfortable on the bike, but I also rode the same frame in aluminum, and they felt almost the same to me. Like there was a difference, and it was subtle, but I don't think for me it wasn't enough to justify the cost of a tie frame. I couldn't, they don't make that particular frame in titanium and steel. They make it in titanium and aluminum. So I was able to compare those two kind of apples to apples.
Which one was lighter? Because aluminum is fairly light relative to steel.
That's right. Yeah. So the alloy frame is actually a touch lighter than the tie frame.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think a lot of it just comes down to bling and like the exclusivity of it. There's something special about tie just because it's a rarer material. I don't necessarily know if that makes for a better material. What's your take?
I had the tie Bear Claw, which I loved, but the internal routing really annoyed me, so I sold it and got a steel bike instead. And weight's definitely noticeable between steel or tie. I mean, the Sklar Super something isn't particularly light, in my opinion, but I don't think there was enough of a discernible ride feel. Like steel just felt, or tie just felt like a nice steel, or at least similar. I think the thing that made the biggest difference would have been the tires. Tires and the wheels probably made a more significant difference in how it felt. I think one advantage of a tie frame is if you have it, that right kind of raw blasted finish, you never have to worry about paint chipping, and you can just kind of sand it down so it looks brand spanking new.
Yeah. I think one of the comments I made when I was reviewing the aluminum version of that frame is with the gravel bike anyways, you're probably running a minimum of 40 millimeter tires at low pressures, right? So obviously the larger volume the tire, the less, in my opinion, the less the frame material matters, because you're getting so much compliance through the tires. I don't know. That's just my take on it, though. Tie frames are they're really nice to look at and to say that you own. But personally, I wasn't able to justify it.
Yeah. I know that tie frames tend to look chunkier. Like they tend to use a larger diameter tubing because they are, I don't know, maybe a little bit more flexy if they use the same kind of thinner or smaller tube profiles as a steel.
Right.
So there's aesthetic reasons. That was one thing about the Bear Claw that bugged me after a while. It's like, man, I just like the look of a really svelte looking steel bike.
Mm, the skinny tube
So,
kind of classic steel.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's right. The tie is not as stiff as right. It's got to do with the material properties. So you have to use a larger diameter to achieve the same stiffness in titanium.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've been
Oh.
sidestepping the steel. The question is steel or tie. We haven't really talked about steel. And I think that's because steel, it varies so much. So you can't really say steel or tie, right? You've got to
Yeah.
say, in my opinion, a more relevant question might be, low end steel versus high end steel, because it definitely makes a bigger difference than steel versus tie, in my opinion.
That is true. Like whenever, I test out like a production steel bike, let's say low to mid range, Surly All City, and compare it to Laura's like breadwinner, like her bike is steel, but it's like always like, I don't know, it's like 3 or 4 pounds lighter than
Mm.
the production bikes. And yeah, so I agree. There's the steel is on the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, that weight difference is not all from the frame, is it?
No, a lot of it's like she has nice wheels on it too.
Nice wheels,
So
nice.
whenever like I work on it, it's like, dang, this bike is so light. I think it's lighter than my Super something.
Oh, wow. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I've got the old 90s. I think it's literally a 1990 Specialized Hard Rock Sport. It's like the base model, right? So that's just straight gauge, low end steel. So it's like
Hmm.
really stiff, really is unpleasant to ride. It's nice to look at, but it doesn't feel great when you ride it.
Right.
Um, and you compare that to something like the Outback, which is not high end, but they certainly, you know, emphasize their budding profiles, and compliance and ride quality is like one of their top priorities, I think. So like the Ritchie Outback ride's way, way nicer than like the old straight gauge steel tubing.
Yeah. Yeah. So steel or tie? It depends. I think that's what most of this episode's going to be. It depends.
Yeah. Steel or tie, for me, I would say a nice steel over tie would be my
Yeah.
my choice, my preference.
Yeah. I kind of want to answer this question that got asked early. Is a clutch rear derailleur necessary? And consider using a rear derailleur extension to increase the capacity of my Rebel 22 from 32 to 36 tooth cassette. Let's tackle the clutch derailleur part, because that's kind of trickle down technology from the mountain bike world.
Mhm.
Do you find that it's necessary on the Grav,
I
or just nice
do.
to have?
No, I think it's necessary. Okay, a clutch rear derailleur is necessary if, in my opinion, if you're running 2x and you're riding a lot of chunky stuff.
Mm,
The reason I say 2x is because, without that tension in the chain, you drop change pretty frequently, in my experience, with 2x. If you're running 1x with, like a narrow wide chain ring, often a lot of times I'll forget to turn the clutch on, for instance, on a 1x, and I'll be, flying down like a rocky trail. And really the only reason I know is because the chain is slapping against the chainstay. But I
mm,
never drop a chain necessarily if I'm running 1x without a clutch. Um,
yeah,
I don't like the sound of a chain slapping the chainstay because I feel like damage is happening right
yeah,
then and there. So that would be the reason to run clutched on 1x, is if you don't have a nice chainstay protector, really is what it comes down to for me.
yeah. On my Sklar, I've got the GRX 810. Is that the 2x11 speed
Yeah,
version?
right.
And it has a clutch, but oftentimes I run it with the clutch off, just because
Mhm.
it's a little quicker to shift.
Mhm.
And no ill effects. So for me, I think it's like depending on the train you ride. If it's like super chunky, then sure. But if it's occasional and mostly like smooth gravel or something,
Yeah.
not necessary. I like prior to the Q's derailleur I put on the rib, I was using an older Dior rear derailleur. I think it was maybe a 10-speed one, not old. It didn't have a clutch, but the spring was was pretty strong, and it seemed to do okay.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on like the vintage of
Right.
the rear derailleur.
That's
And
true. Yeah.
also, and also
Some are
like in the train.
Yeah.
So it depends.
Yeah. Some are definitely stiffer than others, just out of the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people mentioning Seth's video about narrow wide chain rings. I mean, if you've ever like tried to pull a chain off of a 1x narrow wide chain rings, it's actually requires some effort. Like you can't
Okay.
just pull it radially from the center. You've got to kind of unwrap it, for it to come off. And I think that does probably more than the clutch to retain your chain.
Interesting. I wonder if you can still get if you use a narrow wide ring and a 2x, could the front derailleur enough to push it over?
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
No. Okay.
I don't think you can run 2 narrow wide chain rings up front. That
Yeah.
would be cool though. Like, never drop a chain again.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do you want to pick a question from your community?
Sure. Let's see. Bring up some that I have here. Here's an easy one. For gravel, internal routing or not?
How much do you hate yourself?
I mean, I can answer for us. Never, always external.
I think it depends. Like if you're never gonna do anything to the bike ever, then sure, go internal. If you like to mess around with your bike and may have to lengthen or shorten, housing or whatever, then it's it's kind of a pain in the butt. But again, it's also not created equal. Like there's some bikes where
Right.
it's sleeved inside and it's a lot easier.
Yep.
Like the Bear Claw I had, it was just a bunch of holes and that was it. And like you're like swimming through the void of the frame, hoping that you'll come out the other side.
Yeah,
So.
there's always a terrifying moment when the housing, like when you pull it all the way through and now it's inside the frame. You never know if
You're lost in space and you're just like pinging around, hoping that you'll exit the wormhole.
Yeah. I think it begs the question, like this is from Calling in Sick magazine. Like the question was, it sounds like it was emphasized for gravel specifically, right? Which kind of begs the question of, well, why do you run internal in the first place? There's an aesthetic component, like it just people say it looks nicer. But then on the performance side, there is an argument for aerodynamic benefit. I don't know if I buy it, but either way, on the road, average speeds are way higher than on gravel. So for gravel, if there were some type of marginal aero gain to begin with, it's probably reduced to nearly nothing once you're on dirt and moving a little bit slower. So
yeah,
I say if you're gonna go internal on a gravel bike, it's just for looks. And if
it's for looks and to keep your local bike shop busy.
That's right. I was gonna say if you do your own maintenance and you're comfortable with it, then fine, right? I fall into that camp where I do all my maintenance, but I do kind of I swear a lot when I have to service a fully internal gravel bike.
Yeah. With the yeah, that was one of the most painful videos I did with the Bear Claw because I tried all the different ways people suggested to deal with internal routing. So I got the vacuum cleaner and tried to suck floss through the entire frame and use it as like a lead for the cable.
Yeah.
I even used the proper like park tool. I forget what it's called, but the thing with like the magnetic end and
Right.
and it was still a pain in the butt just because of how the frame was built and the tolerances of the holes. They were so tight with the housing, like it had to be just perfect and you had to yank really hard to get it through. Again, I probably had like not the best experience.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. There's also like everything's on a spectrum, like you say. There's internal routing that just goes through the down tube, which is, that's I can deal with that. What I can't deal with is like full. I think full internal means like through the handlebar, through the stem, through the head tube, and then down.
Yeah.
That I never want to touch that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's see. I'm gonna go through the community post on my channel. What's a good question here? Thoughts on carbon forks being super common? How durable are they really?
Have
I
you ever
mean,
broken a carbon fork?
I've never broken a carbon fork. Partially because I don't have any carbon forks, but but I did have bikes with carbon forks. I didn't. Well, that's not true. I didn't like shatter it, but after a particularly like gritty ride, there was enough kind of road aggregate that congealed on the tire that it abraded the carbon fork under the crown. And yeah, it ate away all the paint, got to the raw carbon. I actually sent a picture of that to one of the engineers at Salsa and said, can I still ride this? Interesting segue to that story. However, after that incident, I had suggested, what you guys should do is have user replaceable steel plates under the fork crown and call them a gravel guard, and by the what's it called? By the chain stays near the bottom bracket, just to reinforce it, just so when there is an inevitable abrasion, it's not eating away the carbon; it's eating like some other plate.
Sure.
And they added it.
Oh, nice. So
I didn't get paid or anything or no credit, but
the gravel skid plate.
Yeah, gravel skid plate.
That's cool. That's cool. Carbon's an interesting material because it's really strong in some modes and then almost like weak in other modes, right? So if you're like in my experience, if you're just riding carbon fork, you can get pretty rowdy because it's been designed to flex in that plane, so like, if you hit a rock head on, that's what the carbon fork is designed to withstand, is that kind of impact. But then you see like, okay, here's a carbon fork. It's meant for some aggressive gravel riding, but you can only put like a pound of cargo on each leg, right? Which seems like, really low, like almost not even useful.
Those I don't trust. Like carbon adventure forks with like, they're not even braze-ons. They're like glue-ons, right?
The glue-ons,
yeah. Because I know personally people have loaded stuff on carbon forks and they just tore off. So I would never, no.
Right.
that I wouldn't do.
Because it's not strong in that plane, right? Or in that mode of load. So it's highly dependent on how you're riding the carbon fork and which ways you're loading it. I mean, for me, I've got several bikes with carbon forks. I've never had an issue, but I also never load anything on the legs of the fork. So.
Yeah, things I've heard, like I've seen that personally from friends, like it just shears off the bolts, but also a lot of carbon forks, they don't reinforce the hole near the crown. So if you run like a Portour rack or a Rando rack or a basket, it's actually not meant to support that, even though there isn't probably a ton of stress, but that's a no-go. I feel like Rivendell had these videos on their Vimeo channel where one person had a carbon fork and one person had a steel fork, and they had a little like lightsaber battle.
Okay.
Carbon fork did not last very long. I think that image is just like stuck in my head.
That's funny. Well, I mean, if they're crashing the forks against each other, like that's the thing. Carbon's not good at withstanding localized impact, localized force. That's why if you drop your $4,000 mountain bike on a rock, you've got to replace the frame, right?
Yeah. Well, it might be that also, like, that's one thing to consider, that maybe in terms of being afraid of damage doesn't actually happen during the ride. It's like the handling, the mounting on the car, something,
Right.
Those instances when you're off the bike, there's a chance where something could happen, and that would be problematic.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I forgot what the question was, but
Are carbon forks good for gravel?
I mean they're light and they're you can engineer some compliance into them. So I think for that reason they're a good option. They're coming down in cost too, so you're seeing them a lot more on lower spec bikes, I think.
Yeah. I know that like one of my favorite steel bikes that I bought was the first generation Space Horse with the canny fork. And it
Oh,
was a riot because I'd take it on rough terrain. I could literally like see the fork like flutter and do its thing. And like around the same time, I also had a couple Warbirds, and they just felt like stiff in comparison. So
mm.
I don't know.
Oh,
I
I'm
guess it
sorry,
depends.
were those both carbon forks?
The Warbird was carbon, and the Space Horse was a steel canny
Steel.
fork.
Oh,
So
yeah. So you could see that flexing as you're riding down.
yeah.
Mm.
So I don't know. I mean, what's do you have like when you think compliant carbon fork, what comes to mind?
Like in terms of like, I mean, I don't have any branded carbon forks. I just ride what comes on the bike.
Yeah.
But as far as like compliance, yeah, I mean the fore and aft compliance is definitely there. You can feel it on some forks.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, no carbon fork is going to have vertical compliance. That's just not how they're designed.
Yeah.
Some steel forks, because they have like the bend in the leg towards the end, you get a little bit of like vertical compliance out of them. But I think that's really not what carbon forks are meant for. They're meant
Yeah.
for reducing weight and shaping them into slightly more aerodynamic shapes, I think.
Yeah. Cool. So let's see. Alex here says, I like the lithic fork on my bike for its performance, but it could be a little bit more supple. I will say, like a steel bike with a carbon fork that I rode, which was surprisingly supple to me in the front, was the Ritchie Outback.
Mm.
I felt like that's pretty springy in the front for a bike with a carbon fork.
Yeah. So the thing I'm most interested in that, because I think it probably has more to do with the head tube. The fact that it's not a tapered fork. So I think on the Outback, my guess is you're feeling again some fore and aft flex in the steer tube more than anything else.
Yeah.
Um, people always talk about vertical compliance, right? But you don't really need vertical compliance unless you're coming down vertically, like from off of a drop or something, right? The compliance you feel is actually because you're rolling forward, you hit a rock. The compliance is that the wheel would move slightly back, to absorb some of that. And so that's where the flex in the steer tube is kind of more valuable than like a fork that actually compresses, if that makes
Right.
sense.
I see. Yeah. One of the most compliant front ends on the bike I had was on the polyvalent because I had a quill
Oh,
stem.
oh yeah, yeah.
I feel like that's one of the I don't know, aside from being able to adjust the height fairly quickly, that's one of the unintended benefits of the quill stem. That's
Yeah.
probably not desirable in a maybe mountain biking or road racing context, but now with gravel, it's essentially like a proto future shock or whatever suspension stem.
Yeah, no, like a vintage future. It's past shock.
Right. Retro shock.
Retro shock. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. All right. let's see. How about, okay, you dig in on your side, and I'll troll through the comments. If you guys have any questions, your frequently asked gravel questions, put it in the chat, and we will.
Well, here's one that's kind of interesting that I haven't seen too much of. How useful is from Trung? How useful or effective or convenient are adjustable dropout chainstay lengths in practice? Right. So I've ridden, you've ridden some bikes where you can either flip. There's a flip chip, or you can slide the dropouts fore and aft.
Yeah.
What's your take on
that? It's not something you do. It's not something where you're on a ride and you're like, you know what I want to do? Is I want two more centimeters in the rear. I'm just gonna. It's kind of a pain in the butt.
Right.
I think of the two, between the flip chip and the rocker, they have their pros and cons. I feel like the rocker is a little bit easier to set the position, but you really have to torque it down. Whereas the flip chip, just because it's, it's literally like a stop, it's not going anywhere, is a little bit more secure.
Yeah.
So in terms of not slipping, definitely I prefer the flip chip systems in terms of like how quickly you want to do it, sliding dropouts. But that's what the Sklar has. And I have had instances where also my tires rubbing, and then I look at the dropouts and they've gone askew because I didn't torque it down enough. So there is a downside, but it's not something. It's generally not something that you do mid ride.
Yeah.
It's like when you set up the bike, or you intentionally want to mess around with it. Like, then you do it. But it's not a mid ride thing.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I've got the one bike with sliding dropouts, and I mean, when I built up the bike, I kind of shoved them all the way in, and they haven't moved since. So. I like the idea because anytime you give a customer some options, it's generally, I think, a good thing. But
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I did the same. Like I rode the super something with it slammed, and then with it pulled back, both in drops and alt bars, and ultimately settled on one position that I like for both, and haven't touched it since.
Yeah.
Except for when it slips, and then I have to tighten it.
Yeah. So to that extent, it's good because it gives you some amount of customization. But once you pick once you've found your chainstay length, you'll probably never adjust it again.
Yeah, I think it's a neat tool to find something that you prefer, or to scratch that curiosity itch. But in kind of real world situations, I think most people just set it once and just leave it, unless like a practical reason would be if you change tire sizes, and let's say went from 650 to 29 and just needed actual tire clearance. And that's an instance where it's not just for funsies, but because you don't want your tire abrading your frame.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too.
Yeah,
I guess there are some other applications for it.
Yeah,
this is not like a FAQ thing, but I saw one thing caught my eye. Where'd it go? Avocet 1037. This is just an interesting concept to me. An electronic derailleur. So it's e-shifting, but friction. Non-indexed electronic shifting. Certainly hasn't been done commercially yet. I'm just curious what your take is on that, because I imagine like a servo hooked up to a potentiometer, you can literally just turn a dial
and just dial it. That that I would actually buy. It would be weird enough to make me do it. What's it called? The Archer system is close to that. Because you could, when I was playing with it, you could set it up to have like 99 gears, and it would just change the kind of granularity of how much cable it pulls.
But do you have to push the button 96 times? Or
yes, you'd have to do that. They did have what's it called? They had a firmware update where you could use it with a dropper post. Like it was like not a for consumer thing, but you could. They did have like goofy firmware settings that you could essentially create like a friction shifter with electronic shifting.
Interesting. I'd like to see one of those hooked up to like a potentiometer, which is literally a knob, and you could put a little thummy on it. True electronic friction shifting.
That's what I want. I want like if they made a thummy that was like a blip that you could put anywhere.
Yeah. We'll hook it up to the Uno, and then
there you go. Like a bar end.
Yeah.
Electronic bar end friction shifting.
There it is. Next video right there.
We'd sell all 5 of them.
Right.
Let's see, Matthew here. Flip chip or any type of sliding dropouts are source of frustration by creaking sounds every time it gets dirty and dusty. I could see that. I don't have any issues. Like, I've not suffered from creaks, but I definitely suffered from where one side has shifted and throws a wheel out of alignment. So yeah.
So for you, is it sliding forward or does it actually rotate?
I think like one moves forward and another one stays in place. So ultimately the wheel becomes like cockeyed. And then I have to stop, loosen both, and like recenter it and then crank it down. I just have to get some thread lock. Or something.
That sounds like it'd be a little bit annoying.
Yeah. But after having the bike for a couple months, I don't think I'd get another bike with sliding dropouts, to be honest. I kind of know what I like, and would just buy it right the first time.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. I'm gonna pick this comment here because I've struggled with this. Alex asks, "What is a trekking bike? What's a trekking bike, Nolan?"
I'm not sure. It's one that's easy to hike with. I don't know.
It comes with poles.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, it's a class that doesn't exist in the U.S. Like it's here in Europe. Like there's all sorts. Like I'll see a trekking bike or something, and it's kind of a touring bike, maybe with the alt bar hybrid style. Tends to have geared lower. But yeah, like when I remember, it wasn't until we moved here to Spain, it's like, oh, that's what they mean when they say trekking bike.
So you've seen them more then since you've been there.
Yeah,
they're like actually branded as trekking bikes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like a what we would call a bike packing setup over here.
Yeah. It's kind of like the dad bike version of a bike packing bike.
Okay.
It's just not very cool here, which is a shame because they're super practical. Yeah. He's like, yeah, it's got butterfly bars. Yeah, usually Germans ride them. A German tourist.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
From the stuff you've posted, it sounds like Girona doesn't have too much of that, but as soon as you go to Barcelona, it sounds like there's a much bigger culture of like, alt cycling, as you would put it.
Yeah, Barcelona, city. So they've got actual bike commuters, people that ride fixed gear, bike polo, that whole like alternative bike scene. Girona, not so much. Like it tends to attract high-end road tourists. There's like some local mountain biking,
right,
and people that commute by bike. No one's like riding a nice commuter bike. They're just like beaters, or they use bike share, because it's compact enough of a city where a lot of people either just walk everywhere, or just use transit. Although there is a surprising amount of driving that happens here in Toronto, but yeah, mostly the cycling scene that exists is like the very high-end luxury kind of roady gravel tourism. So
got it.
Yeah. So we got another fan of the wrong comment. Potentiometer bass shifter with giant guitar amp style knob is something I can get behind. Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Kickstarter. The most impractical shifter ever.
That's the reason for me to start a Patreon right there, is to
there you go.
fundraise.
Yeah.
This is Brandon, by the way. He was at the Richie event taking photos for us, so appreciate that. I think he might even put something up on Radavis for us about this event, which is very exciting for us.
Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, that's right. It should have like a big, like Fender, guitar knob on there.
Well, have you seen the what's it called? God, I can't believe I'm blanking on the brand. But it's this light Swiss. I think they're Swiss, but they've got a dial for the light adjustment, and it's very like tactile and feels like audio equipment. What's it? It's like Bookman lights. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I could go for the retro vibes.
Yeah, like a silver.
I mean, something
like a big silver knurled knob or something.
There you go. It's kind of like, in the camera world, the Fuji X100V or now the 6 is super popular because it looks very kind of classic rangefinder Leica-esque. I think the bike world needs something similar, or that there's kind of a latent demand for classic yet modern functioning parts.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So it's actually the perfect product if you think about it. Electronic. Yeah.
Potentiometer, wireless, Barcon. Bam! Take that, SRAM.
You can't even call it friction. It's just non-indexed shifting because there's no friction in the system, right? It's not mechanical anymore.
Right.
Frictionless shifting is because there's no cable, there's no nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, it needs a button so it can be like you can use it for multiple applications too. So
right.
Like adjust the volume on your headphones.
You know what? You can, because it's electronic, you can flip-flop between indexed and friction.
There you go.
There's no reason you can't just make both in the same system.
Right.
Oh, I like it. This is
There you go.
something. Have a set.
Continuous shifting.
Right.
Yeah. Needs to go to 11 as well. Yeah, I know. It's got to look like some audio gear, right?
I was gonna say, draw the little 11, the little Spinal Tap reference. Should we do it? Answer the tire one.
Which one's the tire one?
There's so many. What's your favorite tire for gravel? Is 700?
Okay, let's do the tire width.
Okay. 700 versus 650. Actually, specifically the question was, is 700C really faster than 650?
I think it depends on the terrain.
I think so.
There are instances where, I don't know. It also depends on like the fit of your bike. Like if you can't ride if you have a janky bike because you're short and you're forcing 700s in it.
Yeah.
Then 650 would make sense. Or if you need if you're running really chunky terrain and need like the volume and don't want to have a ginormous wheel, then 650 makes sense. But if it's like smooth gravel and, a lot of road, then, 700 could also make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. You could maybe start with the question: what tire width do you use with gravel?
Width is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an early adopter, but I'm also I'm somewhere in the middle as usual. I always fall somewhere in the middle, because wider tires are better. That's the end of the sentence. Like wider tires they're better in like almost every scenario, right? They're more comfortable and they're not any slower. Like this is what the science would suggest. But we are, humans are accustomed to, like, the whole argument between for wider is faster is that it used to be you pump up the skinny tires, super high pressure, and they feel faster, right? They feel faster because you can feel the road vibrations through your hands. That's actually, so it turns out that's just way slower, right? Because you've got to absorb all that energy, which is taken away from your forward momentum. But still, I kind of like the feeling of putting like a even on the Blackheart, I'm running 700C by 40 which isn't that wide, right? It's just kind of like a wide road tire, and I like how it feels. Like there's a little bit more feedback from the road. It somehow feels more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on the Outback, I've got, giant 700 by 48, 700C by 48 millimeter tires, knobbies. I run them at super low pressures, and it doesn't feel as fast. Like it's more of a relaxed kind of chill kind of
Mm-hmm.
bike. But when you look at the times on Strava, there's no difference. Like I ride the Outback just as fast as I ride the Blackheart, and I'm not trying any harder on either bike. So
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like if you were to ride. Do you ever watch the show MacGyver, or are you too young for that?
no, I had a mullet when I was a kid.
Remember MacGyver had that Jeep?
Yeah, sure.
Like if you took that old school Jeep and drove it down the freeway at 60 miles per hour and then drove a Cadillac at 60 miles per hour, the Cadillac would feel slow
Right.
inside, but you'd feel like you'd be going way faster, even though you're just being vibrated to death in the Jeep.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So it's that vibration that we perceive as speed, but it's really not. In fact, it's slower if you have to overcome those vibrations. That's energy that could be used for going faster. Yeah. So, I mean, the general consensus is I think it's shifting towards use the widest tire that your frame will allow and run it at lower pressures and just do that because you'll be just as fast and you'll be more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember when Panaracer first came out with the Gravel King. We were still living in Portland. And it was, looking back, it's kind of hilarious because like the initial sizes of the Gravel King, they were like 28 and 30 millimeter.
Right.
Like looking back, that is just really funny. I mean, I don't think I've ridden anything narrower on my personal bikes than 47 since I've gone 650V by 47, and I don't really miss it. I did that tour with the Pelago, and it had 700 by 35 Schwabel G1s, and it just felt super stiff in comparison. I mean, it did the tour fine, but it was, when we got on rocky terrain, I felt like I was getting hammered to death. So,
yeah, interesting. I mean, the volume certainly helps, right? That's the biggest thing is you have more air volume, then you've got to for the same. Sorry, what am I trying to say? So if you have bigger volume, you can run lower pressures. Is the whole idea. And when you run a lower pressure, it's like having a softer spring under your wheels. So that's what contributes to the comfort. I will say that I've got a set of 650B. I've got the Terravale Sparwood 2.1 width on the Diverge right now, and every time I put those wheels on any bike that I've put them on so far, it feels different. Like it doesn't feel as fast, and I don't know why. I haven't done much digging into like actually looking at numbers, but yeah, for me, it doesn't go as fast or something. Like it doesn't. I don't coast as long or something like that.
interesting.
Yeah. But that could just be higher also. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems as if like wider tires are getting normalized, but is there a cap? Because it used to be, 47 was the line, and then now it's like, people are designing bikes to clear 50. What like I think like 60 millimeters is going to be the line, especially in 700.
Yeah, like who makes? I mean, Renee Hurst makes a 55, right? 700 by 55. I don't think that would fit on too many of my bikes. Right? So you're in like a different territory there.
You need a mountain bike.
Yeah, right.
At that point.
Yeah.
Let's see. Chu asks, why is Microshift 2X so hard to get?
Because Russ put out a bunch of videos and people are buying them up now.
Right, there you go. I did see a shop get a hold of a 2X Microshift system. I feel like it was in England. But I suspect some kind of manufacturing. Maybe there's too much of the older product in the pipeline that they want to clear out before introducing the new one. I've heard anecdotally that there's such a glut of components on the market that some of the component brands, it's cheaper for them to destroy the components than to try to sell them.
Wow.
We're at that stage. Yeah. I mean, probably not like the higher end stuff, but like the low to middle end, they're just destroying them rather than putting them through the pipe and trying to get them to sell. So
wow,
it's kind of sad.
I hadn't heard that. Yeah, microchip. I'm not sure if you're referring to. Yeah, I'm not sure which microchip you're referring to. Like any microchip 2x or like the new sword stuff.
I'm probably assuming the sword, the new Avanex sword stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've seen them on Amazon actually. I've seen microchip.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can get sword on Amazon now.
Uncle Jeff, Chew, look up
Yeah.
Uncle Jeff. He's got all the goods.
Yeah, he does. So you might start there. It may not be prime, right? You might have to wait a few days, but I've seen them on Amazon, so they are available. At least in waves. Maybe we're at a low point right now. They have to replenish stock or something.
Yeah. I'm gonna answer this one. Vaquero, the IRD subcompact has been out of stock for the longest time. There's a new crank set that's in the works. It's gonna be really cool that will replace the IRD subcompact, and it's got a couple tricks up its sleeve, and should also be available in shorter crank lengths, at least down to like 160. So stay tuned.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, friction DI2. That's a dream. So last week, Nolan had proposed the idea of doing like a versus where we take contrary sides on issues, one of them being mechanical versus electronic. I think we should put a twist on that though. Like I'll argue for the electronic side.
Yeah, we have to pick the opposite side. I would need time to prepare a statement. Like, I wouldn't be able to just flip my mind that quickly on the spot.
I just get comments all the time of why people love electronic. I'll just regurgitate those, and I'll do it without passion though.
The most robotic conversation.
Right. I'll pretty much just be Chat GPT of all like the comments they get, but just spitting it back.
Yeah.
The internet says electronic is better because money.
Right.
Let's see. If you guys have any other frequently asked Gravel questions, put them in the chat. I'm going to look at our community posts and see if anyone has asked anything. Let's see. Thoughts on carbon forks? Someone asks, any thoughts on couplers / breakaway frames? Seem to be popping up in the gravel space more and more. I know Nolan loves his Ritchie Outback. I don't think it is the breakaway version. Okay, breakaway frames. Any thoughts, or have you tried a breakaway frame, assembling, disassembling?
No, I haven't owned one. Yeah, I haven't tried one yet. But I know what they are. I know what it takes to break one down. I've broken them down before, like in a shop. I haven't owned one. What are they good for? They're good for traveling. That's the whole design. You can put your bike in a trunk or in a bag and put it on an airplane. Yeah. What's your take on them?
I think they're less necessary now, because some of the airlines have changed their bike policy.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we flew domestically within the States in the last couple of years, we took American, Alaska, and they all had clauses where, if it's a bike and it fits under the oversize and weight restrictions and just flies as regular luggage. It used to be that if you had a bike and it fit those dimensions, they'd still charge you anyways, just for funsies, like the bike tax.
Mm-hmm.
But now that airlines have adopted more kind of enlightened policies, it's less of an issue. So I'd prefer that, because I've seen people pack breakaway frames into like a small Samsonite, and it does not look fun. It looks really involved because there are all these like cable couplers, and
Right.
I really don't see a reason to do that unless you absolutely have to.
I think
But
my thought is like, how much smaller can you pack down a breakaway as opposed to just, taking off the two wheels and the handlebars and putting it into a bike bag? Like, how much smaller, how much space do you actually save using a breakaway?
yeah, the ones I've seen, like the Samsonite cases, are like a little bit larger than the outside diameter of a wheel. So it is in some dimensions a little bit smaller than kind of like the frame dimensions, because you're breaking that in half.
Mhm.
But yeah, and it just seems like a lot of work. It's not
Yeah.
something, like I feel like it, we use what are they called? I'm blanking on the name of the cases that we use. But basically you have to remove the fork and the wheels, and that's it. It's not that you don't split the frame. And they're fairly small. We can fit 2 of them in the back of like an average size sedan in the US.
You take
Probably not in,
the fork
take
comes
the
off
fork
too?
off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that'll save a lot of space too, right? If you're willing to do that.
Yeah.
And that's way
Uh,
easier to reassemble than like all the cable couplers.
yeah. Yeah. Like there's no cable disconnects. I don't know. I think there was a time when it was more necessary, but now, generally speaking, with the change in airline policies, it's kind of less of a necessity.
Hmm.
So
There was a guy at the Ritchie event who was on a single speed crust. I think it was an Evasion, the black one with like the colorful sparkles, and he had installed the Ritchie couplers on it.
oh, just for
So
fun.
yeah, yeah. So at the end of the ride, I saw his bike in 2 pieces. He was putting it into his trunk. That was just kind of cool to look at. And because it was single speed, he didn't have to mess around with any cables or anything like that. So
I think it makes sense, yeah, for that. Like if fixed gear, single speed, sure.
yeah,
But like once you're splitting all sorts of cables, like 4 sets or whatever, it's a pain
yeah,
in the butt.
right.
Um, let's see. Any other questions jumping out here? Tom Barty, is Dynamo good when it comes to gravel? It depends. I think, like, have you played with Dynamo lights?
Not recently. Like
Yeah.
the last time I messed around with dynamo lights and hubs was, I don't know, before 2000, just, playing around with them. And the technology wasn't nearly as nice as it is today. So,
Yeah. Um, yeah, I feel like in some ways just carrying a spare battery bank is cheaper, and could potentially be lighter than, having a dedicated wheel. Yeah, I don't know. Like I think they're nice for kind of commuting city bikes where the lights are always on and you have to deal with it. But in terms of like a gravel ride, I feel like you can get away with just carrying a battery bank to power whatever light you have or whatever GPS you have.
hmm.
So,
How much friction does a dynamo like induce? Does it feel like a normal wheel? Like, will it spin just as long, or is there some noticeable friction?
uh, with my English major science, it does not feel like a normal wheel. You can feel it like vibrate, and something is happening, and it's not spinning as freely. So I don't know what that translates into engineer science, but there is a difference, and it's noticeable.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there has to be there. Of course, there is some um, non-zero amount of friction that it. I'm just wondering if it's like, do you feel it while you're riding, or is it kind of non-noticeable?
I feel like that with the Pelago, it has a dynamo hub, and I can feel when it's engaged.
Hmm. Just
Both
curious.
on the stand and on the bike. So like there's like just like this slight humming that happens in that it feels like it's coming from the fork. So,
Yeah. Okay. Just curious.
yeah. What else? Let's see. Are you seeing any other comments here?
I had one.
Mm,
You know, it's funny. It's from Lead Out, who's a bike bag brand. They are curious about the best gravel storage options for short and long rides. And I
right.
think bike bags in general are this kind of like almost like a subculture of gravel. People get really
Mm-hmm.
into their bags, and there's so many options. As you know, you've gone pretty deep on the bag. So what's your take on like bike storage?
Let's see. I usually always have a frame bag, just because it's a good place to keep a pump because it's long and it also will store a jacket. So half frame bag. Um, I like the or not handlebar bag. It's got like a real nifty sling to put a phone in. It's one of those, kind of typical like roadie barrel bags, but
Yeah.
it's just well executed.
Hmm.
For longer stuff, I prefer, the kind of carrot ice style bags on the handlebar just because they're, easy to get to, lots of volume, look classy. So,
Mhm.
how about you? What's your favorite grab bags?
I don't like carrying that much stuff. I try to carry like minimal stuff, but like I usually have at minimum like a burrito bag, like just for snacks and whatever spare tube, keys, wallet, that kind of stuff. And then if I need to, then I'll throw a frame bag on.
Yeah.
And then I pretty much always have a little seat pack because that seems like nice and out of the way, just for a couple tools and a tube. Um, I've got some really nice like Old Man Mountain racks and panniers that I've had for a long time, but I can never bring myself to like put them on, because it's a lot of storage and you're adding a lot of bulk to the bike. Um,
Hmm.
I think probably on a longer ride, I'm not sure. I think I would probably go for a rack and pannier over like the full bike packing, pack off the seat and the
A
big
poop
handle.
bag.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So when
Yeah.
it comes to longer rides, I think I don't know, something about having the weight lower on the bike. I feel more comfortable. Um,
Yeah. I'm gonna do a video on why I'm going back to rack packing. Next
oh
big
yeah,
thing.
'cause it's convenient,
um,
right? It's all right
yeah,
there.
because it's if you unless you're like really off-road mountain biking, it's I don't know. I feel like too many people threw the rack and pannier under the bus a little
Mm,
prematurely.
yeah.
Um, yeah, there one type of bag that I do carry, especially when I'm filming, is a top two bag with a magnetic closure. Just
Yeah.
because it's a easy place to put either a phone or an action cam. I can get into it one-handed, do a piece of camera, toss it back in there,
Yeah.
or feed bag. Act
Oh, right, right.
similar.
Yeah.
If I've got a camera and a selfie stick, then I'll just kind of put it in the front there.
Stick it out, yeah. I like the
Yeah.
feedback in the top 2 bag. I like the idea of them, but I feel like in practice, it makes me a little claustrophobic. Like my knees
Hmm.
like hit it or like come to a stop sign. I can't comfortably like stand over the frame if there's a
Yeah.
bag right there. So yeah, I
It's a
think
thing. Like I definitely run into the top two bag
yeah,
occasion.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. It was an interesting question. Obviously, kind of biased, but I like I really like the lead out stuff. I've been using their seat pack and their handlebar bag for. I mean, I bought them a long time ago. They didn't give me anything, but yeah, I like those. They're just like the right size for short to mid length rides,
Yeah.
and they're pretty durable. They haven't like torn or ripped or anything.
Yeah. Have you what do you think of hip packs? They're making a comeback.
Fanny
Do you grab
packs, yeah, fanny packs. I have several because I'll shop and I'll be like, I should just wear one. They're really convenient. This one looks kind of cool. Whatever. So I think I've got 4 or 5 fanny packs, and I never wear them. Like I never wear them. I don't
Yeah.
like. I don't even like wearing. It's gonna sound funny. I don't even like wearing pants with a belt. It's just like too constricting. So when I'm riding with like another waist strap on with some weight on it, it just feels Just feels too uncomfortable for me.
Yeah. Like I like riding in bib shorts, you know, for the reason like there's nothing like around your gut, and like having like strapping a big weighted belt.
Yeah, I can never get comfortable, right?
Yeah. One gravel trend, I don't know. I didn't think it would catch on, but apparently it did with the pro racers, is the vest,
Oh, right.
you
Yeah, a
know,
lot
for like hydration and stuff. I mean, I think it makes sense when you're like trail running, because, you know, you don't have something else to carry your stuff but you.
yeah.
But like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the vest. It just, especially like with like, you know, a liter of water or something, it just doesn't seem fun. So,
But yeah, I mean, that's for gravel racers who are doing super long distances and they don't even want to stop at the rest stops, you know.
right. They don't even want to reach for their water bottle. They just like turn their head and
Yeah. Which is funny because they will all be running internally routed cables for aerodynamics, and yet they put on
right.
a giant turbulence inducing vest.
Right. Or have like a full DSLR on their back to to film as well.
Right.
Racers.
Racers are fine. Racers are fine. There's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't identify with them.
Yeah.
I don't get it's too hard. Like you're wasting all the scenery by going too fast through it, you know?
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like competitive eating, you
Yeah.
know?
That's a good point.
Yeah. Speaking of which, one of the most traumatized, I used to be a freelance newspaper photographer in Long Beach. One of the most traumatizing assignments I had was shooting a competitive haggis eating contest. Because not only did it look gross, but it didn't smell great either.
Oh my god. That would have been tough to
But that's
not
kind of
eat.
like how I, you know, in some ways I look at, and this is gonna be a totally unpopular statement, but like bike pack racing, it's like, why did you take like a nice chill thing and like shove it down your mouth? You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah, you're not savoring it at all. Right?
yeah. So whatever, horses for courses.
Sure.
Yeah,
That's
people are like, oh, unsubscribe. Why are you tearing the bike community apart? Okay. All right. On that note, before we go completely off the rails, I'm going to take us home here. Thanks again for joining us. There's 150 of you awesome people in the chat. Be sure to like, subscribe. If you haven't subscribed to Nolan's channel, The Bike Sauce, do that. Leave a comment, share it, all that good stuff. And as always, maybe in 2 weeks, Nolan?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Okay. Keep the salt side down.